What exactly is a Super Saver, and how can you become one? What does Iron Eyes Cody have to do with retirement readiness? And should grown men still be riding dirt bikes? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 27th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey, welcome to day 20 of the 31-Day Money Challenge. Today we have a special guest on the show. Stig Nybo from Transamerica Retirement Solutions has agreed to talk to us about retirement. He caught my attention. He's the author of a book called Transform Tomorrow: Awakening the Super Savor in Pursuit of Retirement Readiness. I love that term, Super Savor, and we're going to ask Stig about that and also about his adventures with dirt bikes, which you'll hear about in a minute. He brings an interesting perspective to retirement planning, given his work at Transamerica, which you'll hear about. I hope that you'll find this interview to be very motivational. I felt that way after interviewing Stig, and I hope you do too. Before we get to the interview, though, a quick shout out to our sponsors. First, Betterment, as you know, because it's been a sponsor for the 31-Day Money Challenge, so we're in day 20. And I've mentioned Betterment, obviously, in each episode. And it's an online platform that invests your money in both stocks and bonds. You simply pick what percentage you want in each. It does the rest, rebalancing and reinvesting your dividends automatically. If you haven't yet, give them a look. You can go to betterment.com. I've had an account there for a couple of years now and have been very happy. The second sponsor is Personal Capital. They offer a free online tool where you can connect all of your investment accounts, retirement and taxable, and they will slice and dice them for you, show you your asset allocation, very importantly, show you the fees you're paying for all of your investments. I use the tool every single day. You can check them out at personalcapital.com. Okay, so let's get to the interview with Stig. Again, he is from Transamerica Retirement Solutions, and I think you'll find his perspective on retirement readiness to be very helpful and I hope motivational as well. Stig, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rob.
Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us about retirement. Obviously, a very important topic to folks, and particularly in this 31-Day Money Challenge as we work through it. And we actually had to postpone our interview by a couple of days because my understanding is you were on an off-road, a dirt bike, and you had an incident. Is that right?
That's right, on New Year's Day.
So what happened?
I'm assuming you may want a few details, huh?
Absolutely.
So, well, my kids and I like to go out on the weekends and take our dirt bikes out to the local motorcycle parks and go for a ride. And I was out with my son going up a hill, and I ran out of talent before the turn ended, and ended up face down in the dirt, and I did a little damage to my shoulder.
Oh no! Well, I hope you're doing better.
I'm doing much better.
Okay. So I take it, though, you sound like the kind of person that once your shoulder repairs itself, you're going to be back on that dirt bike.
Well, I have a very short memory. So if you had asked me that over the last 3 days, I would have told you no, but you're probably right.
Good. Well, listen, Stig, why don't you just kind of give us a bit about your background, what you do, and how you got into this whole business of finance.
Yes, so I work for Transamerica Retirement Solutions, and we are a provider of essentially corporate retirement plans. So what you think of as 401k, 403b plans, and certainly defined benefit or pension type plans. Those are the kinds of programs that we run for anything from a very small company up to a very large healthcare system. We run their retirement plans. And I run the pension sales and distribution group for Transamerica Retirement Solutions.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and I got into this business actually through the brokerage side. I was actually a financial advisor for some time, a number of years back, but I've spent the vast majority of my time working in with employees and working in the corporate retirement plan space.
Okay, and so for the Transamerica Retirement Solutions, your customers, if you will, or clients would be employers?
That's correct.
Okay, that's interesting because you're looking at this from a slightly different perspective, and in that sense, you probably have I guess a broader view of what goes on in retirement savings and 401ks and 403bs and pensions.
Yeah, so it's interesting. If you look at the statistics around saving in America and true saving for retirement, you'll find that the vast majority of that saving takes place in the workplace. The one place that people save statistically, or I should say, where the average person saves for retirement, it's in the workplace. So it's an ideal place to be to help people save more for retirement.
Okay, now. You wrote a book, Transform Tomorrow, Awakening the Super Savor in Pursuit of Retirement Readiness. And I had an opportunity to read that book, and I enjoyed it, and I have a number of questions for you. But I'm curious, can you kind of give us some background on the book? What prompted you to write it in the first place?
Yeah, so we've been aware for a long time that people have been under saving, And I actually was prompted to write the book by my brother, who he and I were talking about the challenges that we have around savings in this country, and I've told him for many years now that I'd like to write a book, and he essentially said you should write it on this topic, and so that was really the catalyst. It was nothing more than that, but the work obviously took a whole lot longer than that conversation.
Right, sure, of course. Well, so you mentioned super savers in the title, and of course you talk about super savers in the book. What is a super saver?
Well, a super saver is actually a concept that came out of a survey that was done by the Transamerica Center for Retirement Studies, which is a nonprofit foundation that we helped to fund, and they actually uncovered a group that they called future early retirees, which represents about 20% of our population that is actually saving more than they need to in order to retire either on time or even earlier than the retirement norm. So really it's somebody that's built a tremendous habit of saving and really prioritized saving above things like spending and or really bad habits around spending. So it's nothing more, nothing less than that. And what's interesting about super savers is when you look at that population, these aren't people that make an extraordinary amount of money. They're not necessarily people that are very, very well educated. They're simply people that have built really good habits around this topic of saving.
I want to come back to the idea of habits in a minute, because I think that's really important. But I want to stick with the super saver for a moment. And I know from your book you actually describe one, a woman. I don't know if this is her real name, but a woman named Amy. What can you tell us about Amy? What's her kind of background, and how did she become a super saver? What does her savings look like?
Well, one of the common threads around super savers is typically those people have had some kind of positive influence in their life around saving, somebody that really fired them up about the topic and made them recognize that saving can be as fun, and amassing a retirement nest egg can be as fun as going out and spending something, which we all have a tremendous amount of reinforcement or positive reinforcement for spending. Most of us don't have that same positive reinforcement for savings. So a common thread with super savers is they typically have some kind of a catalyst, somebody that helps them get started and on the right track. And Amy had just built a tremendous habit of saving first and foremost, and then spending essentially what she had left over. And that's, in my opinion, the right order.
And okay. And so how does someone become a super saver? You mentioned they had some sort of, in many cases, they had some sort of positive influence in their lives. Of course, some folks may not have that. I think of my own situation. I try to look back to think if I had someone to positively influence me in terms of money. And honestly, I can't think of any for me. Of course, every story is different. But, for those that maybe didn't come at it as a super saver from the start, like Amy did, how do they become a super saver? Is it just, will and courage and just grit and do it? Or are there tips?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to be exposed to it, right? Somehow somebody has to expose you to this idea that it's important to save. And I think that's what we have to do a better job of in our society of getting people to hear that it's important that they save a percentage of their income on an annual basis in order to have enough to retire. And I don't think we're doing a great job of getting that word out as a society. So I think you have to be exposed to it. I do think that these programs that are now starting to emerge within corporate retirement plans, like auto-enrollment programs, which help people get started, can be really helpful in getting people interested. Because I'll tell you, if you get people to amass $10,000, $15,000 in an account, suddenly they take an interest. Suddenly they recognize that they can accomplish something. And we are, I think, very much animals that like to accomplish. And so when you see something start to form like a nest egg or a retirement nest egg, it makes you take interest. So I think that can be really helpful in getting people started.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I hadn't really thought of it in this context. But, when you first start to save, it really may not be all that exciting. You put $100 away or whatever 1 month in a 401k, and boy, it just doesn't look like much. But if you can just sort of get over the hump, get over some number, maybe it's 5,000 for you or 10,000 or 15, where you say, whoa, wait a minute here. Now we're not just talking about $100. This actually adds up to something. And I could see that really motivating people.
Without question. If you think about it, it's really hard to save the first year or two, because the reality is that you have very little amassed, and it doesn't feel very good. But once you start to actually save some money and recognize that you're having some success, it's like anything else. It's very hard to start a sport that you're not good at. But once you get good at it, it gets fun to play. So I don't think it's much different than that. It's just that we don't have a lot of influencers in our society that get people to think about that. Think about the messages that you're getting personally around money. It's typically centered around how much you can save by spending something, by going out and buying something, whether it's a car, whether it's a new telephone or cell phone, smartphone. We're encouraged to go out and buy things. We're not encouraged to save money. And certainly there's some encouragement, but it's not enough.
Well, yeah, we're certainly, the consumerism in our country, I talk to folks who will tell me they just can't afford to save, for retirement. And I do understand in extreme cases people are really suffering, but I think a lot of people, they tell you that, and they've got their $30,000 car in their driveway that they've borrowed money to buy, and they're on their iPhone and their Xbox One and their 60-inch TV. And I don't say these things to be judgmental, but I think there's, at some level, a need to sort of open the eyes and say, look, you can save if you want. You're making choices every single day about how you're going to spend your money, and you can, if you want, make different choices to save more. So don't convince yourself you can't. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's the tough love in me. I'm not sure.
So I could not agree. Excuse me. I could not agree more with that statement. Think about cable TV and just these two things. Think about cable TV and your cell phone bill. And most of us are on a smartphone of some kind. If you combine just those two bills, $100 a month for your smartphone bill, which is very typical, and $150 plus for your cable TV, your internet, and your phone bundled up like we all typically do, that's $250 a month. Multiply that by 12, you're at $3,000 a year. Now, that is not an a pre-tax expense. That's an after-tax expense. So when you gross that up for the taxes that you pay on your income, you're really talking about an expense that's costing you upwards of $4,500 to $5,000 a year. Now take that against the average person's salary, and it's a very profound percentage of their salary. Now those are two expenses that were really not around when I was growing up. There was no cable TV. There was no smartphone. There weren't even cell phones.
Boy, Stig, you're old.
Yeah, I am old.
I know.
I even have gray hair.
It's like I'm talking to myself because I'm old and I have gray hair too. And I certainly remember the day when I first saw cable TV. I have a vivid memory of cable TV for the very first time. I tell my kids that when I was young, we had a remote control and it was me. My mom and dad said, "Go change the channel." I got up and I went and changed the channel.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And at some point, Rob, these things became a necessity versus a want, a need versus a want. And I'm not sure when that was, but I remember when cell phones first came out, and it was extreme if you had one. And cable TV, same thing. People didn't have cable TV unless you were one of the very few. And so at some point it crossed over to this need, and we feel like if we don't spend our money there, we're completely out of the norm. And so you can see that's an escalation of spending, and that's one that's really affecting people. And we have to rethink those things, because ultimately, if we do not save enough by the time we retire, we will run out of choices. There's no question about that.
Well, you've just given me a great idea for an article, because that is perfect. Well, it kind of dovetails with something you wrote about in your book, and I'm again old enough and I vividly remember these commercials. Ironized Cody. Tell us how you worked that into your book and how that relates to retirement. And by the way, I guess what that is, because there's some folks listening to this who have no idea what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, a number of us in our industry have been talking about, how do we change savings patterns for some time, and we kept coming up with the idea that we have to create a public service announcement of some kind, like a Got Milk kind of commercial, and that had been going around for some time, and so I in pondering this whole question of how do you change something that's as ingrained as our savings and our spending habits, and change it in a way that every day you make good decisions around that. And I thought, wow, that's pretty hard. Are we swimming upstream here? Are we able to actually do this? So what I did was I thought, what if I looked back at times and things that we have changed at a societal level, and take a look back and see, have we done this before? Have we created the kind of societal change that we're talking about here in terms of changing savings patterns? And I arrived at the whole Keep America Beautiful campaign and the anti-litter campaign that really started back in the really 50s. In fact, Keep America Beautiful, before Ironized Cody, which was the Crying Indian commercial, before that aired on Earth Day in 1971, there was actually a Spotless Susie was their character, and that simply did not resonate. But Ironized Cody really caught people's imagination, and starting in 1971, actually, Keep America Beautiful did two surveys. They did one back in 1969, and then one in 2009, 40 years later, and they were called visible litter surveys. And what they found was that visible litter over that period of time dropped about 60% in the United States. So a dramatic decrease in the litter that we see out there. And when they looked at what was causing people to litter, they found that it was two things. It was context. It was, in other words, the context that people find themselves in. Is there a trash can right next to my hand? If there is, I'll use it. Right? That's contextual, or a contextual driver of behavior. And the second driver of behavior, which was very important, actually accounted for the vast majority of littering behavior, they found to be our beliefs. So in order to change savings behavior, and all this all came from the Iron Cody campaign and Keep America Beautiful work. In order to change behavior, you have to change people's beliefs around saving. You have to change people's beliefs or the context in which they find themselves, so it's easier to save than not. And if you can accomplish those two things, you can dramatically impact how much people save.
And are there organizations today that are trying to achieve what you've just described?
There are a number of organizations out there that are working on everything from public service announcements to studies around contextual changes like auto enrollment and auto escalation. So yeah, there's a tremendous number that are out there working on this. And I think part of the thing that plagues us a little bit as an industry and as a society is we tend to fragment our efforts. In other words, if we're all coming up with a slightly different conclusion, then effectively we don't have solidarity in terms of the answer that we drive to the end user, to the participant or the saver. And there's a lot of value in coming out with one single answer and saying, do this, save at least 10% as an example. If that's the message that people hear over and over again, instead of just save what you can, which is a little bit of an ambiguous message, then I think there's a lot of value in doing that because it'll help drive behavior.
Yeah, and now real quick, you mentioned auto enrollment and auto escalation. Those are ideas in terms of like if you join a new company and they have a 401k, you're automatically enrolled. You can opt out if you want, but you're automatically enrolled.
That's correct.
Okay. Just so folks are following that. The interesting thing to me there, by the way, is you mentioned this in your book, I believe, but there are studies that show for those that are auto enrolled, the level of participation is much higher than where there's no auto enrollment, and that's obviously across. Those studies are across all different income levels, and so that tells me that people have perhaps more ability to save for retirement than perhaps they're giving themselves credit for.
I think people do. I think people do, and I think to your point, if you get people started in the right direction, people tend to grow into their income. You've heard that many times, I'm sure.
Yep.
I have, and we tend to grow into our income. And I've even been told by people, just wait until you make more. You will absolutely change your spending habits. And, quite frankly, I have changed them. I've always been frugal. So that, I truly am a super saver, which is nice to be able to say. But certainly my habits have changed as I've earned more income. But get people started in the right direction, and they will tend to carry those habits forward. And that's why, again, if you set the context for people, you create an environment where savings is the right thing to do, put them into the plan, let's say in the case of a corporate plan, or as a parent, maybe get your kids saving, get them to put money away into a jar very early on, and carry those habits through in life. It will have a profound impact on their behavior long term.
Right. You mentioned 10%, and I know I've read that on your site and whatnot. How did you come up with 10%? Why did you pick 10% of income as sort of the benchmark for retirement savings?
Well, it's not a perfect number. I'll start with that. There is no perfect number. In fact, the technically correct answer is to go onto one of these calculators, a good calculator, and figure out what you need to save. And for many people, it might be more than 10%. But the reality is that we get a very small piece of people's mind share. We don't get much time with people. And a mistake that we make over and over again as an industry and as a society is that we complicate the message. And so one of the things that we believe is very important is that we send a very strong message that says save at least 10% of your income, and very emphatically save at least 10% of your income. And by the way, that's over your working lifetime. So if you don't start right away, If you don't start for 10 years, then you really should up that number. But the value of 10%, Rob, is the fact that when you hear that over and over again, it sinks in. People hear it, they understand it, and they will tend to act on it. And the fact is that if we were to drive our savings rate in the United States up to 10% from where it is presently, which is down in the very low single digits, we would have a profound impact on what people have put away.
Yeah, sure. How do you define Super Saver, or maybe you don't, but is there a number, like if someone saves, I don't know, 20%, they become a Super Saver in your mind, or does it not quite work that way?
It's again, I think it has to do with when they start and many other things. So there isn't really a number with respect to a Super Saver. It really was defined as somebody that was saving more than they needed to in order to retire on time.
Okay, sure.
And so that might be starting very early and chipping away at it with a solid 10% number. It might be starting a little bit later, seeing the light and backing the truck up, so to speak, and putting as much as you can in. Either way, it's on a trajectory for better than retirement readiness, if you will. Yeah,
I think I fall into that latter scenario because I was definitely not a Super Saver when I started. I've been in the legal practice, but when I graduated from law school and I started working as a lawyer, I was not a Super Saver, and that changed about 7 years ago when I got fed up with my debt, and now I think I'd probably be squarely in the Super Saver category, which I guess is a good story to tell because it means even if you're 40, it's not too late. Okay.
No, it's not, and it's exciting too. When you start to, this is a huge accomplishment for people to save. And so when you really start to amass money, people really get excited about it. And many stories about that I've heard over the years about people, enrollers and people who are out enrolling participants in plans, people who are out as financial advisors dealing directly with people that have had a really profound impact on people, and where people have come back and thanked them and said, if it weren't for you, I would never be in the position I'm in. And one of the big messages in my book is that all of us have a personal responsibility, whether that responsibility is to our employees, whether it's to our kids, whether it's to our community, whomever it may be to. Our responsibility is to make sure that others are doing the right thing around savings, not just ourselves. And one of the most instructional things that can happen is if you yourself teach somebody else what they should be doing with their savings, much like you're doing right now.
That's a great point. That's a great point. I think of my children who are now 19 and 20, and I'm not so sure. Part of it is so personality driven. You've got to take responsibility for your choices as an adult, of course. But I look at spending habits, and sometimes I cringe. Of course, I was the same way at that age. But that's a very good point: is to take responsibility for more than just your own situation, to try to have a positive influence on those within your sort of circle of influence, I guess. So,
and I think there's a adage that the best way to learn is teach. And so if you're trying to save somebody else, you might end up saving yourself, which is a good byproduct.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, that's certainly been true for me in my blog. Writing for DoughRoller for now, it's been 7 years, has definitely had that effect. So before we move off of Super Savers, one last question. You alluded to this earlier, but I think this is such an important point, and that is, from your experience and the studies that you've read, it sounds like there's no correlation, or maybe no strong correlation, between income and Super Savers.
So there was no correlation found in the work that was done by the Transamerica Center.
Okay.
And I would argue that I've heard that over and over again from and by the way, part of what we did in this book is we interviewed a number of professionals that have been in this business for their entire careers, and very solid, what we call 401k whisperers, people who are very passionate about changing people's outcomes. And one of the comments we heard over and over again, actually there's even a quote in the book from and I'm blanking on who it is, I think it may have been John Mott, who was an advisor we interviewed, was that savings was not about income, that it really it was more about habits formed and more about people that understood how important it was. So yeah, you're absolutely right. There isn't a correlation between a super saver and education or income levels, because wealthy people, or people that have high incomes, I should say, can spend just like the rest of us.
Yeah, as I think back in my own life, the people that I know enough about their finances to think this is someone who is truly a super saver, they all had, I say, average incomes. I mean, I think of my grandmother, who was a nurse in a small town in Ohio. She certainly was not rich by anyone's standards, and she was absolutely a super saver. And I hope folks listening kind of take that to heart, because I do think people can get discouraged and think either that they don't make enough or that they didn't start early enough, and so why bother now? It's just too late. And I have a never give up attitude, so maybe that, but I think that's a really good point to stress. So, well, let me ask you this.
And it's not for yourself. If not for yourself, develop that habit for somebody else, right?
Right.
Show somebody else they can do it.
Sure.
Which is equally important, because we all have loved ones and people that we personally have some responsibility for.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Well, what I want to turn to now is something in your book that you talked about, and I think you were citing another study, but it talked about the importance of paying off all of your debt before you retire. How, because we talk about retirement, we always think about the savings side of it, which is obviously critical, but then there is the debt side of it too. How important do you think paying off all your debt before you retire is? How important is that?
Well, I think it's an epidemic right now that we refinance over and over and over again, and what ends up happening is we spool out our payoff for another 30 years. Maybe we get ambitious and go with a 15-year, but the reality is that most of us don't have a mortgage payoff date that coincides with our retirement date, and if we think about the difficulty of just having enough to provide for our retirement without supporting things like debt or perhaps children that are still in college, those kinds of things can put a huge burden on somebody that is trying to live off of fixed income. So I think it's incredibly important. In fact, statistically, it is shown to be incredibly important to pay down debt before you retire, because the retirement system was simply not designed to support an individual and the debt that they carry forward from the things that they purchased, before going into retirement. So,
yeah.
I probably can't overemphasize that point, that it's really important to pay down debt.
As I've been thinking about that in my own situation in terms of debt, and we're down to our mortgage at this point, but of course, you mentioned if you have debt, then that's just more. You got to pay that debt each month, so it just increases what you need in retirement. But I also I wonder, is if without debt, you have more flexibility in terms of how much you withdraw from your retirement accounts every year. And people talk about a withdrawal rate, and 4% seems to be sort of the common rule of thumb. But if you don't have debt, then it seems to me you're a lot more flexible in what you need each year, which can be important, particularly in a year when the market is down. And if you're able not to take that full 4%, it seems to me your odds of your nest egg lasting longer than you do go up.
I think that's a hugely important point, is that we know the markets go up and down, and we know that flexibility with respect to withdrawal rates can be hugely important. Obviously, there's some limitations with respect to retirement plans that may require that you take out a certain amount, but most of us are in a position where we're taking out more than that required amount, and it would benefit us to be able to leave that money in. So it really, this is no different than a startup company with a burn rate, right? And a certain amount of money in their war chest, so to speak. It's important to keep it real, because if you're spending too much, and that includes things like debt service, the money's just going to run out quicker. And by the way, one of the bigger risks to individuals is longevity, right? We all know what, or I should say we all do, but the life expectancy for an individual is about 80 years right now. And if you think about what that really means to an individual, it means that you, Rob, will probably live longer than 80, and I'll probably live less given my motorcycle riding habit.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Hey, well, I'm kidding. But the bottom line is that neither of us will likely live to our life expectancy. So if you're planning to live to your life expectancy and have enough money saved for that amount of time, you really got to plan beyond that. You have to plan for the eventuality that you, or perhaps you and a spouse, will live significantly longer than your life expectancy. So, again, the burden of retirement savings it's a very serious one, and a big part of that, a huge part of that, is keeping that burn rate down, or that debt service out of the picture, if you will.
Right.
So loans are really important.
Okay. The last topic that I want to turn to is, in your book, you referred to the power of habits. Actually, I think it was The Power of Habits, Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business, which is an excellent book. And I'll leave a link to it in the show notes. But I'm curious if you could just kind of talk about what you've seen in terms of habits. And, the book talks about a keystone habit, that one habit that if you change has a significant impact on other habits in your life. I mean, are there keystone habits that we could look to to try to become super savers, or just to even save 10%? How do you see habits sort of playing into this whole question of retirement readiness?
Well, I think savings. I think it's all about habit, and I think the keystone habit can be something as simple as your company retirement plan. It's again, if we look at statistically, and by the way, I want to be careful not to sound self-serving here, because I work for a company that runs these plans. But if we look at where people feel like they are able to save their money, it's in the workplace. Why? Because it's payroll deduction. It comes right out of their paycheck. It's very simple, and people sign up for it one time, and as long as they don't disrupt it, it continues onward. So I would argue that one of the most profound keystone habits, to use the I think it's Duhigg, I think is blank.
Yeah, Charles. That's right, Charles Duhigg.
Charles Duhigg, yeah. So one of the most important keystone habits is your deferral rate, your savings rate into a plan like your company retirement plan. Why? Because once you set it, it continues at that rate. Certainly you want to make sure that you can escalate it if you can at points in time. But even if you were to get aggressive at the outset, set that and live with that in perpetuity, it would serve you incredibly well. And the beauty is that keystone habit is something that affects other things, right? It's a habit that builds other good habits. And by paying, as they say, paying yourself first, or paying your retirement account first, that effectively will drive down your spending. Why? Because you have less in your paycheck. It will increase your focus on your retirement plan. Why? Because you amass some wealth, and you look at it and say, wow, I better pay attention to that. So it indeed is a habit that can create other really positive habits in your life, and I would consider it a keystone habit as he defines it.
Yeah, and the thing about deferral rates into a 401k is it's automated. And one of the things that I've been preaching is it may seem hard to do it first, but if you do it, it won't take long and you'll completely forget about the money that's going in there. It really won't affect your day-to-day, month-to-month life like you may think.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. It's out of sight, out of mind. Any number of sayings will work, but it really is something that once you've done it, it's something that sticks unless you disrupt it. And most of us stay with, or I should say, the median tenure for an employee. So the midpoint of people staying with one company is about 5 years. So if you've done it early on, you've got 5 years of that for most people.
Right. Well, listen, Stig, I really appreciate your time today. This is such an important topic, and I hope folks that are listening, I hope this motivates everybody to go out there right now and do something about the retirement savings, whether it's starting a 401k to contribute or increasing their contributions, or as you say, maybe getting rid of cable and reducing your cell phone bills, which can help free up money. One question I like to ask folks that come on the show, and I want to ask you is, what's your favorite personal finance or investing book, or some book that's really had a profound effect on you and money?
Well, so it's actually a book that was written some time ago, and I'm not sure it's the most interesting book, but I think it might have the most profound message. And it's actually a book called The Millionaire Next Door. And the reason I picked that book is because I think the message is so critically important, and I can sum it up actually quite quickly. I mean, there's certainly sub-themes, but I think the primary theme is spend less than you earn and save the rest, and it will serve you incredibly well. And I think it's an incredibly important message. And as I said, there's a lot of sub themes within the book, but that's the dominant one. And so I would say The Millionaire Next Door. We all have to get better about budgeting, about thinking about what should be saved versus what should be spent. Because if we look around our houses, we will find an ungodly amount of clutter that we probably didn't need to buy. In fact, we know that some 3-4 months after we've done it, but we all tend to spend too much and save too little.
Yeah, I was
that was my choice, Rob.
Yeah, I was smiling as you said the clutter thing, because I've been working on our clutter. The Millionaire Next Door is a great book. I've read it. I've got it on my shelf. The thing that struck me about that book was that some people I think have this vision of who or what a millionaire is, and if you read that book, you're like, wow, they're pretty ordinary, kind of boring, just regular people. They're not what I think they are. They're not what I see on TV or in the movies. And in fact, what I hope a lot of people take away if they read that book and just from the show is, they're just like you and me. I mean, they're just everyday people who just have spent a little less and saved it. And given enough time, if you do that, you'll save a fortune. So.
Well, and that book is all about Keystone habits, isn't it? Right?
Absolutely.
It's all about forming that habit of spending less than you earn, and from that, all kinds of other themes fall out of it. One of them being that, as you said, these are everyday people, and the most unlikely people are millionaires because they have formed these habits. But it's also you spend less on your cars and everything else as a result of that budgeting habit, if you will.
Yeah, I can remember reading that book, and it's been some years, but they would talk about getting these folks to be willing to do an interview, and they would just offer them a free lunch, and they'd be right there. Okay, free lunch, I'm there. And these are the millionaires. Sometimes some decamillionaires coming in, but they got a free lunch, so they're ready to sit down and talk. Well, listen, Stig, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I've enjoyed it, Rob. Appreciate the time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview with Stig. One thing that I found very interesting is, he talked about sort of a guideline, if you will, of saving 10% of your income. But when it came to what exactly a super saver was, there's no sort of, save X percent and you become a super saver. It was you're saving more than you need to for retirement. And I think there's an important nuance there, and that is, what we need in retirement is a function of our lifestyle, right? And how we want to live our life in retirement. There's no sort of one size fits all. And it reminds me, I go back to this interview a number of times because I think it's just so inspiring, and that's of Mr. Money Mustache. And, he was able to retire at 30 by holding back the expenses, by living a lifestyle that he and his family were content with, but is perhaps not what you might consider traditional. But the result was that he could retire at 30. Well, the same principles apply even if for you and your family, you're not going to retire so early. Maybe you'll retire at a more traditional age, say 65. But what you need for retirement is in large part a function of your lifestyle and how much money you spend. And so being a super saver isn't about how much money you make. You can be a super saver and on a modest income, and for that matter, you can make quite a lot of money and not be a super saver. And so I hope you'll think about that. I know it's something that my wife and I have given a lot of thought to. There was certainly a time when we were not a super saver, as I mentioned in the interview with Stig, and today, and probably for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, I would probably classify us as super savers. But it was something. It was something that we had to learn. It didn't come naturally to us, certainly not to me. My wife is frankly more, I think, conservative when it comes to spending money than I am, or certainly than I used to be. And so it wasn't something that just came naturally to me. I didn't grow up as a super saver. It's something I had to sort of learn the hard way. But I guess the good news there is if it's possible for me, it's possible for anybody. Well, that brings this podcast to a close. You can find the show notes at DoughRoller.net/podcast 27, and I will include links to all of the resources that we mentioned in the interview today. As always, you can send me an email at dr@DoughRoller.net. I read every email and respond to every email. You can also leave a question in a voicemail. Just go to speakpipe.com/DoughRoller to leave your question or comment. You can subscribe to this podcast. Just go to DoughRoller.net/iTunes. It will redirect you to the iTunes page where this podcast resides. You can subscribe and leave a review. And if you haven't already, sign up for our weekly newsletter at DoughRoller.net/newsletter. It's a free newsletter packed with resources and tips to help you make the most of your money. It goes out every Saturday. So remember, until next time, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.